Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TechGeek webinar series, our endeavor to empower techies. We believe that sharing of knowledge is the key to enhance our skills and grow us as professionals. With this principle in mind, we have initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give you all a crisp insight of various domains. The topic of today's session is Amalgamation of Project Management and Business Analysis, Recipe for Project Success. Our guest speaker today is Mr. Chetan Mathur, Project Delivery Manager at Nokia Siemens Networks. A PMI India champion, Chetan has reached 17 years of experience in end-to-end program and project delivery, portfolio and account management, and business and strategy development. Chetan has managed and delivered various end-to-end projects and programs spanning from RFP, discovery, due diligence, transition, and transformation to application support and maintenance. He has wide global experience on project assignments and project management seminars. A member of PMI, Chetan is a certified PMP and is certified on ITIL and ETOM best practices as well. So without further delay, I introduce you all to our guest speaker. Over to you, Mr. Chetan.
Thank you, Mohini. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chetan Mathur, and on behalf of TechGeek and Project Management Institute, I welcome you all to this webinar on amalgamation of project management and business analysis, the recipe for project success. Although Mohini has introduced me, but I would like to give you a small introduction about myself and also introduce you to two organizations which are responsible for globally defining, managing, and augmenting project management and business analysis standards, respectively. Now, the reason for this introduction is that this will set the context for our session today. Now, to start with, I have overall 17 years of professional experience in IT, primarily into telecom space. I'm also certified and experienced in travel and transportation and healthcare verticals. I'm PMP certified and also hold professional certification in ITIL and business process framework, which is nothing but ETOM certification. I'm currently employed with Nokia Siemens Networks, and I'm also a member of PMI, a current champion of PMI India, and an ex-member of International Institute of Business Analysis. So the two organizations that I wanted to introduce to you here are Project Management Institute and International Institute of Business Analysis. PMI, which was established in late 1960s in Pennsylvania, defines, manages, and augments the globally accepted project management practices. IIBA, on the other hand, is an independent non-profit association which serves the growing need of business analysis across the globe. There are many certifications from PMI on project management arena, and there are certifications from IIBA on business analysis. But in recent times, what we have seen is that while project management has been understood and accepted as a formal delivery process, typically in IT, but business analysis is yet to gain that acceptance. Is yet to gain the acceptance that business analysis along with project management, hand in hand, can only ensure the success of projects. While a number of organizations today have project management functional units, but we have seen that very few actually have established business analysis center of excellence. I can only remember 3 organizations which are existing in India currently that have set up business analysis units. So that actually sets the context of our session today. So to start with, let me introduce you to a project. This project, when planned and when executed, it was completed within 80% of its schedule and within 90% of its budget, which means that at completion, the project was well ahead of its schedule and very well within its budget. However, the project was still considered a failure, a disaster. Now, this was one of the projects, or rather one of the kind of projects that all of us as project managers would need to be ready to plan for but none of us would actually like to execute this project. And now let's see what this project actually was. Okay, so let's see if this project here is a successful project. Let's look at the topmost box. This is how the customer explained what he required. The next one says this is how the project manager or the project leader understood what was to be done. How the business analyst actually understood it and designed it. How the programmer wrote it. How the business consultant described what was to be done. And the biggest pain point was what you see on the bottom pane, how the project was documented. Actually, none. What operation installed was absolutely different. The customer was built in a different way. The project was not at all supported. And the best part comes at the last. The customer actually needed what was nowhere in any of these pictures. So what is coming out of this slide? The customers also do not know what they want. We require a very well-established business analyst who knows how to extract the requirements from the customer. We need to have a very well-established project management practice. We need to have a very well documentation of not just the requirements but the entire project process. Probably the project managers and the business analysts at that time did not know about the best practices that PMI preaches, which are documented in PMBOK, and the best practices that IRBA preaches, which are documented in what is known as BABOK. So this is a typical scenario that exists in most of our projects today. However, what we are here to learn today is one winning formula that involves BA and TM that will ensure that our projects are a success. So let's look at why do most projects fail. We saw in the last slide, this particular project was delivered well within time, within budget, but nowhere within the scope. In fact, nobody was aware of what the correct scope was, including the customer. Successful projects are those that are delivered on time, within budget, and most importantly within scope. Now there may be more than these three criteria that define the success of a project, but these three are the most common and the most important ones. So if you see here, what are the most common reasons for failure of projects? Improper or incomplete stakeholder analysis. So what is a stakeholder? As PMBOK preaches, or as is understood in PM community, a stakeholder is an individual or an organization whose interests are positively or negatively impacted by project execution. So if you don't do the complete stakeholder analysis, you're bound to fail. Lack of user involvement in the requirement solicitation, design and development, improper or incomplete requirements definition, lack of traceability of requirements during project lifecycle, changing requirements. So what is coming out here are two important things, stakeholder and requirements. If you don't do a stakeholder analysis completely and correctly, if you don't define our requirements correctly, if you don't manage our requirements completely during the entire project lifecycle, we will fail. So what does it require? It requires project planning, execution, monitoring, and control. Project planning, execution, monitoring, and control to be very tightly coupled with what? Business analysis. To overcome what? To overcome problems caused by incomplete or misunderstood requirements or improper or poor understanding of project goals, scope, objective, and deliverables. Here is where the essence of the amalgamation of business analysis and project management comes. So for us to understand this in more depth, let's first look at what is project planning, execution, monitoring, and control, and what is business analysis. We'll look at this. We'll look at the roles of a project manager versus a business analyst, and we'll also look at a case study, an actual project that I have executed considering these two parameters, considering these two sciences, and that project, I can go towards a success. Okay, what is project management? I'm sure a lot of the attendees here today who are project managers or who are PMP certified would be very well aware of what I'm going to talk about the next 2-3 minutes. So project management is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities in order to meet the objectives of the project. So we apply what we call as KSTT, knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities. What do we manage in a project? As of December last year, the standards were that we manage 9 things or 9 different knowledge areas. Post that, the new version of standards have been released which say that there's one more area that is to be managed. So let's look at each one of them very briefly. Scope is the one which is pretty important right there on the top, and it says everything or all the work that is needed to complete the project and only the scope of work, only the work that needs to be done in order to deliver the project's deliverables needs to be managed. Time includes the activities that you will do in order to make sure that your project is completed within the schedule. Quality consists of defining the quality policy, defining how you will do quality assurance and quality control in your project. Procurement involves how do you manage resources, how do you bring resources on your project, or these resources could be human resources or any other resources. Communication deals with managing all kind of information exchange within your project. Cost and human resources, risk are other important ones, but what has been added recently is stakeholder management, what we just saw before. Stakeholder management and scope management actually are the two knowledge areas here, which very, very strongly interface with business analysis. There is a process within scope management which is called requirements gathering. And that coupled with communication and stakeholder management are a key to what we are going to discuss further here. We saw what is to be managed. Let's look at how is that managed. What you see listed here are the 5 process groups. The 5 process groups list different processes that you do as a part of project management. As a part of initiation, you authorize the project. You have as a project manager, you have the authorization to start the project. As a part of planning, you do the complete project planning. You define what's going to be your project scope. You define what's going to be your project budget or your project schedule. Remember we saw in the previous slide, it requires project execution and monitoring and control. So the execution is actually the point where you do what is to be done. So you execute the project. You do what you have already planned. You gather the requirements. This is an example. So it includes the processes to complete the work that you have defined in your project management plan. Monitoring and control is where you observe and measure your project's performance. You identify various variances from your plan. You identify various potential problems. You recommend corrective and preventive actions. And at the end, once you have achieved your project objectives, you go ahead and close your project. So having understood what is execution and what is monitoring and control in project management, let's now look at what is business analysis. So business analysis involves what? Investigation of a business problem or opportunity. Given an opportunity as a project manager, I've been given an opportunity by my previous team that this is something that you have in the pipeline that's coming your way to be executed. Investigation of that. A systematic analysis and documentation of the requirements that the complete solution that is to be delivered to the customer has to satisfy. Analysis and documentation, and we will look at these in detail in further slides. And the role of a business analyst does not end just there. He has to support the entire life cycle of the solution and project, including implementation and testing, to ensure what? To ensure that the requirements that were supposed to be delivered have actually been delivered. Okay. Looking from bottom towards top, there are 6 different phases of a business analysis life cycle. Starting from business analysis planning to requirements solicitation, to the management and communication of requirements, performing enterprise analysis, detailed requirement analysis, and then solution assessment and validation. Okay, let's look at all of these 6 phases in slight more detail. So business analysis planning and monitoring involves a complete planning and monitoring of business analysis activities, typically starting with stakeholder analysis and requirements and delivery planning. Remember the definition of stakeholder we discussed a few moments back. And stakeholder analysis is equally important in business analysis as it is in project management. So we identify who are our stakeholders who have to give me requirements. We plan the requirement and plan how those requirements will be delivered. Elicitation is nothing but gathering those requirements. And we'll see in further slides what are the different methodologies or what are the different ways in which we can elicit those requirements. Requirements management and communication deals with communicating the gathered requirements to all stakeholders to make sure that there is a shared understanding of the nature of the solution, and to ensure that those stakeholders with approval authority are in agreement. Because at the end of the day, there has to be someone who signs off that yes, those requirements are the requirements, the implemented requirements are the requirements that I had stated, and those requirements have been met. So you need somebody who will perform what we call as the user acceptance testing. Everybody, all stakeholders need to be in agreement with that. The next step will be to perform an enterprise analysis. So every time a new opportunity comes up, or the same business analyst is doing requirement analysis again, a fresh enterprise analysis needs to be done. This means assessing the capabilities of your enterprise in order to meet business needs and achieve strategic goals. Now, is this opportunity in line with what is the mission and vision of my organization? Is this aligning with the strategic goals of the organization? Do a portfolio analysis, do a balancing act. Once approved, you do a detailed requirement analysis. Analyze stated requirements in order to define the required capabilities of potential solution. So now the requirements are being translated into a solution that will fulfill stakeholder needs. The last process here says solution assessment and validation, and this is the one that rolls over all the way to the project end, because tasks that are performed in order to ensure that solutions meet the business need and to facilitate their successful implementation, including validation of requirements by supporting the testing. So as a business analyst, your role does not just stop when you define the requirements, when you define the solution, but during the entire life cycle of the project by supporting the testing. Okay. Let's look at the role of a project manager versus business analyst. Many a times, typically in IT organizations, what we have seen is that other people or enterprises do not really give emphasis to business analysis as a stream. When it comes to eliciting requirements, the first person who gets selected to perform the role is the person who's sitting on bench. Somebody who's available gets up and elicits the requirement without knowing what is the right process to do that. Many a times it is the job of a project manager to find out what the detailed requirements are. However, science says both of these are very explicit and very separate roles. So let's look at the responsibilities associated with each one of them. While a project manager defines the project scope, business analyst is responsible for defining the solution scope. A project manager estimates what all resources he needs and acquires those teams as a part of project HR management. A business analyst will model the business. He will compare the as-is with to be, what is planned to be delivered. How is it different and how we will reach there. The project manager will develop the project plan, and developing project plan is a part of the process which was integration management. You have a separate plan for each of the knowledge areas, and then you consolidate everything and come up with project plan. A business analyst develops a requirements work plan. Project manager coordinates the project. A business analyst develops the business requirements document, BRD, which is typically the outcome of a requirement analysis phase when we talk about the waterfall delivery life cycle. Project manager manages the project risk, constraints, and dependencies. Business analyst does all the requirements. Project manager reviews and accepts the project, whereas business analyst is responsible for validating the requirements all through the life cycle of the project. Project manager performs project closeout. The business analyst supports testing. It's very important that a project manager capture the lessons learned and best practices at the end of the project. The business analyst is responsible for gathering and documenting the requirements to make risks visible and provide crucial decision support. So what is a risk? It's an unforeseen event in future that may impact the project deliverables positively or negatively. That's the definition as per PMBOK. However, those risks with respect to the requirements come from business analysts. So very clearly the roles of a project manager and business analyst are separate. And unless you have them in the right flavor and right balance in your project, the project will end up what we have on slide number 1. So let's do one thing. Having known what is project management, what is business analyst, and what is the role of a PM versus BA, let's look at one of a telecom case study. It's one project, one mega project that I was involved in one of my previous organizations. It's an MNP implementation project. And I'm sure most of us here would know what MNP is. It's mobile number portability. It was one project which was going on for quite some time, but sometime in 2010, various operators were given the mandate to implement the first pilot by end of November 2010. And the timeline for the pan-India rollout was also not too far away. That was sometime in January 2011. This was a very complex project. I'll tell you why this was a complex project. The project was to be implemented across all 14 operational circles of the operator. The stakeholder groups involved were huge, spanning across at least 3 groups. The regulatory, which included the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, TRAI, and the Cellular Operator Association of India. The TRAI and COAI had appointed 2 clearinghouses. Those are called mobile clearinghouses. Those were the organizations that were interfacing the operators with the regulatories. Those were MIPS, that was the body of Telcodia and Cineverse, and they segregated the entire pan-India MNP operation into 2 zones. Then there was a third-party MNP gateway interfacing to MCH. So for the operator, there was an MCH that was interfacing. There was an MNP gateway that was interfacing to MCH, and then there was an MCH which was interfacing to TRAI. Within the operator, there were stakeholder groups, various functions. There was the IT function which was actually responsible for implementing this project. The next biggest stakeholder group was customer services delivery, which was the customer support function. The marketing and sales, which was responsible for promoting the operator so that people who actually port out from other operators port in into them. And then we had the other finance, network, vigilance, and security were equally important, if not less. The other stakeholder group were all other operators circle-wise, with whom the operability testing for MNP was to perform for each circle. So believe me, there were 14 operational circles, and then there were at least 6 to 7 various other operators operating in those circles. So the MNP testing was to be performed with each one of them. Overall, a pretty complex scenario, and there was absolutely no possibility of failure here. What the project team did here. Let's look at the project management and execution methodology. We devised what we call as a flexibility matrix. And again, the project managers here would know what the triple constraint means. So from the triple constraint of cost, scope, and schedule, we devised the flexibility matrix. We tried to find out what is most flexible and what is least flexible. Schedule came out to be entirely non-negotiable, the reason being that this was a regulatory project. Followed by scope. Because the business non-functional requirements could have been compromised for schedule. Cost was the most flexible component, and we were given the authority by the project sponsor to go ahead and use as many resources or as many functional resources or as many methodologies that we wanted to deliver this project. That's where the project team decided to bring in a business analyst, a separate external business analyst. Why? To bring in the telecom MNP experience, because this resource was involved in extracting MNP kind of requirements in previous projects. Independently perform stakeholder analysis as regards MNP implementation. Now you would agree with me when I say that if it would have been an internal business analyst within our own organization, either the requirements would have been compromised or the requirements would not have been understood. Having come from a third party, this person independently performed stakeholder analysis and made sure that all the requirements were captured. Made sure no requirements slipped through cracks. He did a seamless integration between numerous stakeholder departments. And as we saw in previous slides, the responsibility of a business analyst to track the requirements end to end. Moving ahead on the project management methodology itself, performing organization. The performing organization is an organization whose resources are most actively involved in project execution. So the responsibility for the performing organization was shouldered to already in function PMO, the Program Management Office, within the IED function. What did this ensure? This ensured that the interdepartment issues, dependencies, and risks were managed timely and appropriately. This was already in function organization and was already interfacing with the business customers and regulatory authorities. So it was an easier job for a program management office to manage the requirements. For project planning, execution, tracking, monitoring, and controlling, we are coming back to those terms that we saw earlier. We implemented an enterprise project management tool. An enterprise project management tool made sure that all the project issues, risks, and dependencies, be it at any circle level, were monitored through enterprise project management. The timely, accurate communication flowing into the relevant stakeholders for prompt action. Okay. Stakeholder analysis. See the first line here, the BA along with PM and PMO teams. So as we saw, stakeholder analysis is a very important part of project management. It's one of the essential items when it comes to the roles and responsibility of business analysts. So the BA along with PM and PMO teams section the internal stakeholder groups into groups as below. Groups that had high power and high interest. For example, are regulatory authorities. They had pretty much high power in terms of changing or updating requirements, all the schedule, timelines, and they were the high interest group. High power, low interest. The high power, low interest groups were the groups of other operators with whom we had to perform testing in different circles. Low power, high interest was definitely our own group, which was the IT function there. We had absolutely no control over the requirements, but we had the most interest because we were to make sure that the project was implemented on schedule, within budget, and yes, within scope. Low or low interest groups were the groups like finance, like vigilance, which had the requirements in there, but yes, those are not as important as the regulatory or business requirements were. We performed the stakeholder analysis to plan and execute specific most appropriate requirement recitation for each of these groups. We looked at the as-is process models, how the business models work currently, and how the business models would change when we implement MNP. What would be the impact on various groups, each of these groups, when the as-is was converted to 2B. Assign requirement accountability to groups. As I said earlier, there has to be somebody who performs the user acceptance testing later on, who owns those requirements later on. Obtain buy-in, support, and common understanding with individual groups. One of the key deliverables or one of the key artifacts that was prepared by the business analyst was requirements work plan, RWP. RWP contained the detailed stakeholder analysis based upon the different segregation as we saw in the previous slide. It included the scope of work for this BA. It included the schedule of requirement elicitation and budget. The requirements risk matrix. So if we go back to one of our previous slides and see what were the roles of business analyst here, we'll see that most of what a business analyst did for this project maps to what are the defined roles for the business analyst, including preparing the requirements work plan, validating the requirements, identifying the risk related to requirements, and making them visible to the project management team. To make sure that no requirements actually fell through the gaps and to make sure that the requirements were captured end-to-end, there was a requirements tracker gap analysis report that was prepared. Again, going back to the communication part of project management and going back to one of the process areas of business analysis, we know that communication of requirements and agreement of requirements between all stakeholders is very important. So the requirements tracker was the tool that helped the business analyst and the project manager cover that gap up. This RWP was approved by the project sponsor, and it made sure that obviously no requirements were missed or forgotten. The requirement elicitation was tightly coupled and integrated with other project activities. All stakeholders are on the same page as regards expectations from business analysts and the project delivery team. It served as a communication and negotiation tool for the BA, project manager, and the project sponsor. Many a times it happened that our business teams came up with new requirements. That was a true case of managing change request. However, going back to our flexibility matrix, we came to know whether we would be able to incorporate those new requirements or whether absolutely those requirements have to be taken in the next release. So this RWP was a very important tool to negotiate the requirements by the business analyst. How did the elicitation happen? The requirement elicitation happened from regulation to business to the user group. For a typical IT enterprise in an operator group, marketing and sales and corporate CSD are our biggest business teams. So the business analyst, together with the user groups and the business teams, sat, discussed the requirements, We had brainstorming sessions, we prepared questionnaires and discussed those questionnaires with the business teams. The requirements were structured based upon two things. One, the circle implementation, if any, or what kind of a user group or what kind of a business group it catered to. Document and validate the requirements. The requirements were captured in multiple passes. Analysis and validation of the requirements led to additional needs. All stakeholder groups helped in validating the requirements, in addition to serving as source of requirements. The requirements were decomposed into smaller groups of requirements till the time they really could not be decomposed further. This made sure, again, that no such requirement got missed that was either not built into the prime requirements or was a child requirement not initially thought of. So the brainstorming session made sure that the requirements were decomposed into the smallest level. And once again, all requirements could track back to an owner who could perform UAT and confirm that requirements were met. So the requirement elicitation and validation approach. We reviewed the as-is. The as-is was reviewed by observations, by observing the documents, by doing proof of concepts on the current system, by verbal protocol, by discussing with various stakeholder groups. We reviewed what is the current state of the system. Facilitation techniques, focus group, targeting on the group of requirements, brainstorming, finding out what could be a possible requirement. Survey techniques, since this BA actually came with a previous MNP experience, so he had a data bank of possible questionnaires. Not all could be done in a typical MNP environment. So survey techniques, interviews, questionnaires were sent to various stakeholders before the elicitation was done, and then those questionnaires were discussed. In case of a conflict, my requirement versus your requirement, which one goes into this particular release first? So regulatory requirement definitely had an upper hand with respect to business requirements. In case of a conflict still, the revenue impact or dollar value was identified. Any kind of a business requirement that was important and came later on was judged based upon the revenue impact or dollar value. So these are some of the techniques we adopted for eliciting the requirements. How did we trace the requirements? So the living document requirement tracker gap analysis report tracked the requirements from a regional stakeholder all the way to the UAT. It started with the original stakeholder. It came back to the original stakeholder for UAT, but during this time, the entire project lifecycle has elapsed, and this document made its way through each of the phases. All the requirements were recorded as they passed through each different phase. Things were not easy. We definitely encountered barriers to requirement elicitation. Multiple times relevant stakeholders were either not available or were not willing to share the information. However, the biggest challenge was that individual stakeholders did not know what they want. And that's what we actually realized in our first slide, that my customer really didn't know what he wants. Even to translate the regulatory requirements into what is actually required, there was numerous discussions with the regulatory teams. Those requirements were also discussed when it came to business. And again, the BA coming with previous MNP experience made sure that the stakeholders knew what their requirements were. Another barrier was that the stakeholders are focused on solution and not the requirements. If in a typical telecom scenario, my telecom fraternity friends here would know what I'm talking about. A typical OSS, BSS, and IN solution, people were more worried about how their solutions would work, how things will change in their system, rather than what is it that needs to be implemented, and how what is to be implemented actually interfaces with whatever else was there in the system. Okay. So what is the current status of MNP implementation? When I started, I said that the MNP was to be launched on a pilot basis during November 2010. MNP was launched in Haryana Circle on 25th November 2010, and I was there sitting in an auditorium in Hisar when this launch happened. The pan-India rollout happened on January 20th, 2011. What is the industry trend? Airtel has been the most preferred operator with many, 26% of survey that was conducted, they voted for it, followed closely by Vodafone and then Idea. What are the most common reasons for people opting to port out? Network coverage and tariff rates emerge as the top two reasons as to why subscribers wanted to avail of MNP. Now this MNP implementation at that time was restricted to intra-circle, and now we have inter-circle MNP also coming up. Okay. The previous slide here what we just spoke about was about MNP at a telecom environment or at a telecom fraternity level. When we talk about what happened to this project in the operator environment, this MNP project was implemented across India on schedule. This MNP project captured all the requirements that were agreed upon with the complete list of stakeholders. Although we had no cap on the budget that we could have used, but the project was completed within budget, has shown positive trends for subscriber port in for the operator since that time. The best part, the project went on to receive the best IT project award for that operator. And I'm glad to say that I was the project manager for that project. Okay. I was recently asked by someone. He asked me, Chetan, why do we call it amalgamation when you tell him that project management and business analysis have to be separate? I said, sir, project management and business analysis are two sciences, that serve as two essential pillars for success of any project. Unless you perform them by skilled individuals, who complement each other with the right balance and skill during the project life cycle, the project would end up in a disaster. You would have a scenario what we had on slide number 1. We have to have project management, we have to have business analysis. We have to have both of them complementing each other. Both of them have processes, both of them have knowledge areas that talk about two important things, stakeholder management and requirements management. And if we follow both of them in this right flavor in a sense, our project will be a success. So this amalgamation of project management and business analysis is the one winning formula for the success of our project. So that brings me to the end of this presentation. Thank you very much for patiently listening to me. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the insightful presentation, Mr. Chetan. I have assigned you a few questions. Let's quickly take them up. I hope you can see the questions.
Yes, just give me a minute. Yeah, I can see the list of questions here. I have the first question from Bhadra Rao, and I'm being asked if while running the project he only performs some of the critical test cases and not the complete list of test cases because the project delivery date has reached. Should the project be handed over to client? My dear friend, in project management, we say that a project manager communicates for 90% of his time. This means he is communicating with his project team, he is communicating with his customer, with all other stakeholder groups. There are two answers to this, or rather two aspects of my answer actually. If you keep your customer informed, I'm sure such a situation would not arise. Secondly, if you do not execute all your test cases and only do critical test cases, you are not adhering to the requirements. You will never know when one of those requirements that were captured earlier falls through the crack. If you're not following your requirement traceability, if you're not making sure that all of your requirements have passed the testing phase, I'm afraid you should not be handing over your project to the client. This project will not be a success. Okay, the next question is from Abhinav, and Abhinav has asked me, in my opinion, project management is a generic profile, whereas DA is more domain task-oriented profile, like what I presented in the case study? No, Abhinav, it's not like that. The reason we had a specific business analyst in our case was that it was a regulatory project, and it was a regulatory project that involved regulatory bodies. To make sure that we understood all the requirements correctly, we wanted to have a business analyst that had previous M&P experience. This is not always the case that you need to have a domain-specific business analyst. As I said, there are very few organizations in India who have a business analysis center of excellence. Except for one of them, the other two are in themselves oriented specific to a vertical. So their business analyst may be specific to only the vertical. But otherwise, I also know about an IT organization, a very big IT giant in India, who also has set up a business analysis unit. And there the business analysts are just one group, irrespective of the vertical. Okay, the next question is from Kumar, and I'm asked, will project scope validate business requirements, or business requirements will validate the project scope between project manager and BA? Kumar, I see that you are a PMP, and you would know that scope management says it includes the processes required to ensure that the project includes all the work required and only the work required to deliver the project. Correct? So, and also in scope management, we have a process that says collect requirements. When you come to collect requirement as a process, the business analyst is a full-time party to it. He is actually the person who's executing that particular process. So between project manager and BA is accountable for gathering those requirements, but project manager is responsible for making sure that those requirements are gathered. Another question from Bhadra Rao, who is responsible for validating and confirming that all the requirements are collected? If you've seen the presentation, you would remember that I saw that the project sponsor actually signs off the RWP, the requirements work plan. However, not all requirements are collected in requirements work plan. Every requirement has to go back to a user who will own that requirement and sign off. It is the responsibility of the business analyst to make sure that all the requirements are gathered. However, it is also the responsibility of business analysts to make sure that those requirements are signed off by the respective user. Okay, how did you assign a dollar value to a feature, Yogesh? Yogesh, if, again, here I'm talking about, this is not a feature that we implemented, but this is just an example in a telecom environment. If you were to implement a feature of a ringback tone, and you know that your business case is that you will charge every customer 50 paisa for every download and 30 rupees rental for this feature. Over 1 year of implementation, if you have a projection from market that 50% of your subscriber base will use this feature, you can easily translate into a dollar value. Was the requirements plan aligned to the project plan and how? Yogesh asked. The requirements work plan formed a part of the project plan, and the requirements work plan said how the requirements would be collected. It said who would be my stakeholders. This requirements work plan took inputs from stakeholder management, from project management part. The project manager and the business analyst together were responsible for making sure that your RWP was an integral part of your PMP. Siddharth asked how often you expect the roles of PMBA being merged. Siddharth, that happens most of the time in industry, but that's not what should happen. There have to be different persons responsible for their own areas. The minute you merge these two roles, you have a single pillar supporting the entire block, it will fall down. Okay, this is a long question, however, I will just cut it short. The question is, what kind of skills does a BA need? Technology management, etc. Okay, this question is asked by Rahul Agarwal. Rahul, if you go back to my slide deck, we had a business model there, and there we had that there have to be organizational skills, entrepreneurial skills, and interpersonal skills. Those three kinds of skills were mentioned there, and those skills are required for a business analyst to do whatever we just discussed, to follow all the 6 processes of business analysis. A business analyst need not be technical. A business analyst need not have project management knowledge. A business analyst need not be specific vertical, but he needs to have those 3 skills to make sure that he is able to analyze the requirements and track them to finish. And then the next question, by Shiva was on what are the skills for a good BA. For all of you who are interested in knowing what are the good skills of a BA, I would request you to go and visit www.iiba.org. This is the website for International Institute of Business Analysis. IIBA actually runs two certifications, Certification of Competency in Business Analysis, which is CCBA, and Certified Business Analysis Professional, which is CBAP. Become a member for other chapters of IIBA, download a copy of BA book, and then you will get to know more about it. Mohini, I think I'm done with the questions. Are there any further ones, or do we have more time?
Yes, we have a few more questions, Chetan.
Okay. Do PM need to be technical in order to manage the project? Well, if you guys are there on LinkedIn, you would know that that's one most common discussion that's going on in various project management communities. There are various opinions about this. People say that PM needs to be technical because he needs to understand what has to be done in a project, what are the different activities that need to be followed. Some people say that no, irrespective, it's a domain that somebody should be aware of. I actually go with the second opinion, which says that a project manager need not be technical necessarily. It helps if the project manager is technical. PM can play the role of BA. That's the next question. The kind of skills that he needs are what we have just spoken about already. Okay. When the change in the scope of the project threatens the delivery timeline, who is responsible to negotiate the new delivery date? Okay. This is a complete project management question, and there's nobody but the project manager, but it depends upon the kind of organization setup that you are running into. You may have an account manager who's sitting there with the customer who is responsible for managing all customer activities, including this. But obviously, there's no role of BA here. It's project manager and or account management. The question was asked by, sorry, I'm not able to get them here. Okay, do we need PMBA amalgamation to all projects irrespective of the size of the project? Asked by Kalyan Kumar. You are saying size of the project. Well, again, it depends what project it is. What is the, size? I would not say, irrespective of the size, yes, you would need to have the right combination of PM and BA. But it will depend upon the organization setup that you are in, if you will get that kind of a combination. Depending on the type of the project, if you ask me, we do a lot of SI kind of projects, we do a lot of time and material kind of a project. Definitely for big SI kind of a project, this is a necessity. Again, another question on what are the skills one need to be having to have a good business analyst. We answered that already. What if PM and BA is not available at the time of release? Then who is responsible for delivery of project? Anirudh has asked this question. I really have not understood the question correctly. What if PM and BA is not available at the time of release? So if you can be more precise and ask that question again, maybe I can answer that. Which documents required to create in Agile-based project by BA? So the guideline for Agile-based projects when it comes to business analyst is an extension of BA book for Agile. But your question is what documents does a BA needs to create when it comes to an Agile-based project? I do not see any change in the documents that the BA is preparing when it comes to an Agile. The only thing is even for small sprints of Agile, you need to have the complete traceability of requirements that you are delivering in that particular sprint. So your documents, your RWP will actually be segregated based upon various sprints. And the requirements tracker that you prepare will actually also be segregated based upon various sprints of delivery. However, you can look at the BA-BOG Agile extension if you want to know what specific the IIBA preaches for that. Amani, are there any further questions?
No, that was all from our attendees and Mr. Chetan. I'm really thankful to you for conducting this webinar. It was indeed a great session. I would also like to thank all our participants for their support in making this webinar a success. The recording of this session would be available on techgeek.com by tomorrow. Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you.